Good afternoon, and welcome to one of the last sessions of this training day. I have the distinct pleasure and honor to present to some of you our guest on the panel today. With us, we have Thomas McCaffrey. He is the Director of Adult Probation and Parole Department in the 5th Judicial District, which encompasses the greater Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania metropolitan area. Mr. McCaffrey was named as Director of the Adult Probation Department in 2009. Mr. McCaffrey, a court employee for 31 years, also held positions of probation officer, supervisor, manager, and director. Mr. McCaffrey is an active member of the National PreTrial Executive Network Board, sponsored by the U.S. Department of Justice National Institute of Corrections, and consults as a peer reviewer for the United States Office of Justice Programs. He is a graduate from the University of Pittsburgh School of Social Work. Our next on the panel, Ms. Janice Radovic-Dean, is the Director of PreTrial Services Department in the 5th Judicial District of Pennsylvania, County of Allegheny, and Pittsburgh. She began her career with the 5th Judicial District in 1989 as a probation officer. In 2005, she was promoted to supervisor of the electronic monitoring program, and in 2007 was transferred to the newly created PreTrial Services Department, where she implemented innovative programs and policies and procedures and made constructive changes within the department. Ms. Radovic-Dean serves as Vice President of the Pennsylvania PreTrial Services State Association and as an affiliate director of the National Association of PreTrial Services. She is a 1988 graduate of the University of Pittsburgh with a degree in criminal justice. Also on our panel, Mr. Ron Sako. He is Deputy Director of the Adult Probation and Parole Department in the 5th Judicial District, which encompasses greater Pittsburgh, Allegheny County. He has enjoyed 33 years with the courts in probation, as a probation officer, supervisor, and manager. Please join me in welcoming our guest. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This must be the die-hard conference goers right here, I'll tell you that much. I count 11 people in the room that actually don't work for us. The rest are our own people, so that's kind of a friendly audience. That sort of makes this a little bit easy. This is the second time we did this presentation. We did it this morning. That was sort of the trial run. We got a little bit behind and rushed it at the end. But I think we'll be able to manage this okay. I think we've got a plan B. I'm here with Janice Dean, Ron Sako. What we plan to do is talk a little bit about evidence-based practices in general, accepted best practices in the fields of probation and pretrial, and share our experiences with putting these practices in place in the work we do every day, which is a huge task. Anybody that has looked at any kind of cultural change within the court understands that this stuff doesn't happen overnight. We were actually very, very lucky in the way our court developed these practices, because our changes were driven from the top down. A lot of times if there's a probation director or a pretrial person that has ideas, looks at research, wants to do some new things and change the culture of an operating court, it's hard to do to convince the decision makers above you to take a chance and do that. There's a lot to be said for a comfort level with courts. And anytime you make these big changes, there is a chance for press. If you're talking about non-monetary bonds, if you're talking about setting aside benched caseloads so you can redirect services to the people committing crimes, these are risky things to do for higher up folks. So we were very lucky. We had an administrative judge at the time and a court administrator that were both very progressive thinking in what they wanted to do. It was around 04, 05 when our court started to make these updates and consider these changes. And the higher-ups in our county put people in place and got stakeholders together to make that happen. So we really had a head start in, at what we did to employ some of this work. What we'd prefer is an open dialogue. we didn't know if we're talking probation and we're talking pretrial to primarily court administrators, what you hope to take out of this. So we would prefer an open discussion. Feel free at any point to ask questions. Like I said, it's our goal that you actually can take something out of here, an idea, or if you want more information about a specific thing we're doing, feel free to ask as we go along, and we'll just sort of wing it. Janice puts these PowerPoints together, and I never go by them anyways. So it drives her nuts, but that's okay. It's better to operate that way anyhow. Is there anybody in here that doesn't work for us that's employed directly in a probation or pretrial setting? Probation? Great. All right, so then if we just start making stuff up, you can bust us on that, right? It's late in the day. We just sort of wing it as we go. Just as we get started, just quick background on Allegheny County. We encompass the greater Pittsburgh metropolitan area. We're a Class 2 county, and all that means in Pennsylvania is that our county encompasses not only the city of Pittsburgh, but a relatively large geographic area around the city of Pittsburgh. We have a Pittsburgh Municipal Court, which constitutes about 63% of all the criminal cases coming into our court. The other 37% of the cases are fed into our court from 48 district courts surrounding Pittsburgh, each one with an independently elected judge running that court. And they're all out there in their own little kingdoms, and it provides some challenges, especially when you're talking about making change in pretrial and bail recommendations, and Janice will get into that specifically a little bit later. Our jail, a few years ago we built a new jail because we were under a federal mandate that we were overcrowded in the old jail. After we built the jail, it didn't take us very long to fill that up too. Our jail holds about 2,800 people or so, and we're always hovering slightly under the max in the jail. Things we did with pretrial a few years ago drove the jail population down, and it stayed down to where at least we're underneath that cap, which was a huge win for us in Allegheny County. As far as pretrial goes, we reformulated and created our pretrial program in 2007. It consists of about 50 employees now. We do bail recommendations. They do about 20,000 investigations a year and provide recommendations. As far as the adult probation department goes, we're 180 employees, and we supervise felony and misdemeanor cases in probations, paroles, and intermediate punishment sentences. We supervise about 25,000 offenders with 120 probation officers. I know that math seems a little bit off, but that's the kind of challenges we have. Looking at probation and pretrial together, 29,000 offenders are under supervision with 125 probation officers. That's 236 apiece for each officer. And Ron will talk a little bit about what we do with risk assessments, how we set cases aside, and how we sort of modeled what we're doing with that population. Because we had some really big challenges when we were setting that up. To understand what we were dealing with, you kind of have to look at what was going on in Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, the prison population over the last 10 years increased 14,000 beds. Our DOC in Pennsylvania spends $1.8 billion a year on criminal justice. As a mirror of that, in Allegheny County, we're in the same boat. We spend $144 million a year on criminal justice. When we looked at our jail population from '98 to 2008, and over that 10-year period, we increased our jail population 59%. Now, that's more than the increases in LA and New York and Chicago. So we really needed to take a look at what we were doing, and the jail population is one of the first drivers to cause us to look at our practices within our court. When you looked at the factors feeding into the jail population and the problems that was causing us, there's basically three things that affected or were the drivers of the jail population. One were the mandatory sentences. I don't know which state you all are from, but in Pennsylvania, the DUI laws that were passed and the drug laws that were passed with mandatory sentences absolutely devastated our programs in our court. It overwhelmed us with cases. It overwhelmed the jail with cases. And we made some pretty unique adjustments to it, which Ron's going to address in a little bit. Second factor has to do with recidivism. When we looked at the people coming into our jail, 7 out of 10 people coming into the jail had already been there one time. That causes us to look at what we're doing on the probation side on the back end. What are we doing? Because we're recycling these same offenders right back into the jail that we've had there before. And the final thing is the length of stay and some issues with pretrial detainees. And I know that's a national issue, and we had that going on in Allegheny County. So basically the changes we employed in these two departments directly were addressing the reasons that we drove the jail population up, which caused us to do what we do. So, getting into a little bit of the evidence-based part of it.
I don't warrant a lapel microphone like Tom did, so I have to use the handheld. When we started making some changes, we were looking at, people kept telling us about evidence-based practices, evidence-based principles, and we were sort of not sure what they were. So once we kind of got that down, we had to agree that if the evidence showed us that we were doing something that wasn't working, we had to be willing to go ahead and change practices that maybe we had just instituted so that we could go ahead and keep that evidence-based moving forward, because it's ever evolving. And if you know much about evidence-based practice, I always like the quote that once evidence-based, not always evidence-based, showing that things do change and that you have to make sure that you make those adjustments for that. The evidence-based principles, and I think we do in the 5th Judicial District, we do a really good job of sort of following from that front-end risk needs assessment through training and keeping track of what we're doing, and then re-looking at what we're doing as far as the 8 principles, which are really mutually reinforcing and coordinating. Resources for evidence-based principles, really by the evidence shows that you're better off using your resources for high and or moderate and high risk defendants and sort of leaving those low risk offenders alone, and that's something probation's doing a really good job of now with some initial really good success on that. So what's the point of evidence-based practices? I forgot I have to do this myself. Evidence-based practices are going to do basically a couple things for you. They're going to reduce your recidivism, uphold public safety, reduce costs, and enhance collaboration. If you're using evidence-based practices for reducing recidivism, what you're looking at is that you've got more assurances that you're using your resources towards who needs it. So when you have that risk needs assessment, you're actually applying your resources where they're going to get the most bang for their buck. Upholding public safety is really something that when we made these changes and we were talking to the police departments and the district attorney's office and the magistrates, everybody was talking about, well, evidence-based practices, all evidence-based practices is you're like trying to be nice to these people. You want to get them an education and you want to get them a job, and it's really soft on crime. And we really spent a good deal of time in educating those people that really evidence-based practice is not soft on crime. It's harder for defendants in jail to get a GED or to learn a trade, or when they come out to go to programs that are going to make them look at what they're doing, what's causing their criminality. So evidence-based practices, we spent a good bit of time telling them that it doesn't say that you can't use incarceration or revocation on these cases. So we brought them around. Reducing costs, huge, right? The jail cost was our big driver in making, any of these changes, so that once in pretrial, for example, our first month when we had made our changes, we reduced the jail intake population by 30%, which actually calculated into a really nice savings and time savings for the jail. Enhancing collaboration is something that I think we do really well. We collaborate with everybody. You can flick it. And the oh yeah, there it is. The integrated model for instituting evidence-based practices shows that you need, right, the organizational development, the evidence-based principles, and the collaboration to make that work. So evidence-based principles, we're good. Organizational development, we have that. And the collaboration, we really do a good job of that, and we've come a long way on collaboration. Yep. So some of our collaboration efforts, our larger collaboration efforts, is our Criminal Justice Advisory Board. Basically, it's a conglomeration. Actually, our president judge is here, and she's the head of our Criminal Justice Advisory Board, along with the warden, who else? Administrative judge of criminal court, Department of Human Services director, and the health department director. And so we meet everybody from our district attorney's office, chief of police, department heads, everybody's in the room, and we actually focus on issues. And we've gotten a lot of stuff done over the years with the Criminal Justice Advisory Board, and we actually use our Criminal Justice Advisory Board now in our court to run all of our grant proposals through. So it has to get that approval so that everyone in the system knows what everybody else is doing. Our jail collaborative was formed in 2000. Basically, we have that cabinet, and then there's a larger group of people that work to improve public safety, build a better system of reentry into the jail for people leaving the county jail. Our case reviews was an innovative process that we did, and actually we have a published document on the case review that is available on the mobile site and will eventually be available on the NACM website for you to view that document. The case reviews was, if you know anything about case reviews sort of came about because of the healthcare field, and the healthcare field wanted to stop killing people. So they took a look at cases where there was fatalities, near fatalities, and they looked at different procedures, took a look at that whole case and figured out what they could do better to stop that from happening. In our court, our Deputy Director of Human Services was using that case review process in children, youth, and family cases for death cases and near fatality cases. She thought it'd be a good idea if we tried it in criminal court, and the first initial thought on that was it's adversarial. People are not going to like having what they're doing looked at, and we did it. Our first case review, we put the timeline together. We spent a good bit of time reconstructing the case, and we've held 5 case reviews to date, and we had 6 or 7 pages of issues that we uncovered from the case review. We formed committees. Each committee got different issues to look at, and then we fixed a bunch of stuff. And there was a lot of stuff when the case review came about that was just, we realized that it was just a matter of communication. So person A wasn't talking to person B, which was easily fixed. There's some larger issues that we're still working on as far as case processing, time to disposition, but it really did enhance collaboration, and it really brought a lot of issues to light. The IRC project, which is our information resource project, where we're attempting to integrate data systems that are currently not integrated, and looking to have access to a lot of data that people don't have access to now, which is would be huge for us. There's also currently, it's relatively new, CCAP, which is the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania, has a BJA grant. They're working on a unified case system, which will unify probation departments, district attorney's office, and the jail data into really core data. So we've been working with those things and hoping we can get a unified case system that everyone can grab the data from, and we're not duplicating information. We're not asking a defendant the same thing 20 times.
I just want to speak briefly about the Pittsburgh Initiative to Reduce Crime. It's also referred to as PERC, and PERC came about as a result of an increase in homicides in the city of Pittsburgh, particularly in 2008, 2009. And Pittsburgh Initiative to Reduce Crime is modeled after the Operation Ceasefire that was in place in Boston in the mid-90s. And the way PERC works, and this has been replicated across the country, and it's shown success in just about every jurisdiction. But the way PERC works, gang members or groups, violent groups within the city of Pittsburgh, are brought in to a call-in session. Okay, the groups that are identified throughout the city that are involved in violent actions, most of them are on probation and parole, so we have some influence over convincing them to show up at these call-in sessions. We invite them to a call-in session, and probation, parole, we partner with other law enforcement agencies, the City of Pittsburgh Police, the County Police, Sheriff's Department, District Attorneys, the Federal Prosecutors, U.S. Attorney's Office, as well as community organizations, victim service organizations, service providers. And we get representatives from these groups in a meeting, in the first few we're at the federal courthouse, we've had them at the criminal courthouse, and the message is clear. Everyone comes up from the different representatives and say that no more violence. The violence has to end. And we explain to them that we're not going to tolerate it, and that if they continue to commit crimes, violent crimes, then the weight of the law enforcement community, the court system, is going to come bearing down on their groups or gangs. And we say it's not too late to get out. And there's an opportunity to turn your life around, and service providers are present and willing to sign people up for job training and education, employment, tutoring, giving them an opportunity to leave the lifestyle. And we tell them that if it continues, then we're going to focus on the group that is responsible, and the full weight, as I said, the full weight of the courts and the law enforcement will come down on that group. So they leave there, they have the opportunity to call a number, to access the services, and there will be another violent act. I mean, it happens. And so what we do is we have suppression details, we have full law enforcement, we focus on that particular group that's responsible, and we hold them accountable. And there's a subsequent call-in session, and we bring people in again together, and we say, okay, this is what happened. This group was responsible, and we put on a PowerPoint. This person, prosecuted under federal law, is now serving 20, 30 years in a federal penitentiary far, far, far from their home. We say, just explain all the consequences of that continued violent act, and then we say it's still not too late. You can give you an opportunity to turn your life around and provide these services again. And interestingly, it seems to be having an effect. City of Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh is studying the outcomes of this initiative, and the first call-in session was in July 2010. After the first year, the City of Pittsburgh reported a 20% reduction in homicides. In that same period, there was a 16% reduction in aggravated assaults. So, and aggravated assaults now are because of modern medicine, maybe a few years ago would have been homicides. What the bottom line is, we're driving down violent crime with the PERC, and it's a partnership and a collaboration that we're involved in.
I don't know how that got in there. I'm not sure how that got in there. So this is the mission statement for our PreTrial Services Department, and you don't need to, I'm not going to quiz you on later what it said, but what I just want to talk about here real quick is that when we did make changes, we really got everybody's opinion from the secretary. We put a group together. We call them the Developmental Change Committee, and basically what we do is we meet once a month. We don't make any changes in our PreTrial Department unless we run it by our Developmental Change Committee. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to talk me out of doing stuff or our court of doing stuff, but at least the people that are doing the work are getting the information, and they can say, we might do this, and that might sound like a good idea, except that if we do this, we're going to mess up B on the back end if we do A. And they understand that because they're doing the work. Our transformation really started in 2004 with basically a scan of our programs. In 2006, there was another scan done, and basically, Pretrial Justice Institute came in and said that you guys, of the 80 things that you're doing, 79 of them are wrong. You're only doing one thing good. So we had a decision to make. We could either continue to do 79 things bad and tout our one good thing, or we could make some changes, and we decided to make some changes. We consolidated functions that were historically under probation and parole. Our first offender diversion program, we had a behavior assessment unit that does court competency. Is it raining? Okay. Just wondering. Does it sound like it? Okay. Just wondering. And then we sort of merged those under one roof of our pretrial services department. When we looked at what we were doing and what we weren't doing, we were basically at that point recommending money bail. We were spending all of our resources at our bail agency on making recommendations to the magistrates and nothing back end. So basically, Pretrial Justice Institute said, you got to flip-flop that. That's bad. We need a validated risk assessment, which we moved into eventually. We have a validated risk assessment, currently having it revalidated as I'm here. And we consolidated into a pretrial department that does everything from initial risk assessment to back-end supervision of pretrial defendants. I guess our biggest challenge in making some of these changes was getting the information out to the magistrates who were actually making these bail decisions. They are elected officials in our court, and we don't recommend money anymore. So they didn't understand, like, what are we going to tell our constituents when we put a guy, we release him on no money, and he does something. So we spend a lot of time with them doing some education. We still continue to do ongoing education with them. But the majority of them are good, and they will take those recommendations, and they are using the non-monetary conditions. Our investigators, we don't recommend a money bail anymore on anyone, so we go straight with either they're too dangerous to release, hold without bail, or the judge can put them on pretrial electronic monitoring, or we release them on non-monetary conditions ranging from low, where they're phoning in, to medium, where they're reporting to our office daily, weekly, monthly, bi-monthly. However that order comes down. We do drug testing, mental health evaluations, and so we've been really successful in that. We've had basically in the last year and a half or so, our recidivism rate, court overalls, about 27%. For those people who are under pretrial supervision, it's about 17%. Our overall court FTA rate is 22%, and our FTA rate for those people that are under supervision is about 14%. So that translates into money when you're talking about not keeping those people in jail, making them come to court, and them not getting a new charge.
After we started making changes to the way we were doing changing our business practices, we changed our mission statement. We solicited input from all levels of our organization, from support staff to line probation officers, supervisors, managers, on up. And I just bring this to your attention in that even in our mission statement, we're strongly suggesting that we're going to be measuring things. We're looking for improving public safety, becoming more effective in our community corrections with probation, parole supervision. And we talk about the collaborations that we discussed earlier in our mission statement, how we partner with law enforcement, we're partnering with community groups, and we're promoting behavior change instead of telling people like we used to, these are the rules of probation, parole, don't do it again, and just waiting for them to fail. We're now promoting change in offenders. No, next slide. Okay. So the evolution, how we got to evidence-based in probation. We started, as Tom mentioned earlier, we started the changes in 2006. We decided that we needed to take a proactive approach to supervising offenders. And by that means that we are going to find out what is causing the crime, what is causing someone to commit crime, and then putting supervision practices, resources in place to stop that cycle of criminality. So this new way of doing business involved to supervise offenders by risk. Before, we treated everyone the same. As Tom said, we had caseloads, the average caseloads, a couple hundred. There's no way in the world you can have an impact and pay attention to each individual the way they need to be just by treating everyone the same. So we looked at using a risk assessment, and one of the first risk assessment that we use, it's a pre-screening tool. It's called a proxy, simple 3-question screening device. What's the current age of the offender? What is the number of arrests the person has had, total number of arrests, and the age at first arrest. This gives us a nice first cut look at breaking our population into 3 types of offender groups: low risk, moderate risk, and high risk offenders. So what we do is the low risk, the research says you leave them alone. I mean, they're still obligated to pay their court costs and fees, but there's no active supervision. We monitor them to make sure there aren't any new arrests, but we move them to we call a bench caseload, and the research actually says if you get yourself involved and focus on low-risk offenders, you actually increase the likelihood that they're going to commit crimes. So we leave the low-risk offenders alone. And we concentrate our resources on the medium and high-risk offenders. And we do that by we identify what their needs are, what are the crime-causing behaviors, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit. We use a needs risk assessment known as the LSIR, Level of Service Inventory Revised. It identifies crime-causing factors that an individual has that make them more likely to commit crime. And when we do an assessment, we identify what is going on in their lives that would most likely cause them to commit another crime. And we focus on those factors. And we focus our limited resources on dealing with those offenders in the medium and high risk. And we manage and monitor the results and adjust that way.
So evidence-based practices in pretrial so far, we have a validated risk assessment. We had that validated in 2006. It's a retrospective study, looked at 53 key data elements and came up with 9 predictive elements for pretrial risk, which is going to be appearance rate and misconduct rate, rearrest prior to the current case disposing of. We really spent a good bit of time training the staff on motivational interviewing and understanding that risk assessment and the science behind it, because we had a lot of questions on it from magistrates, police departments. So having the staff that was actually administering that understand the basic science behind it was key for us. We also automated the risk assessment, so there was no option for anybody to self-enter scores data into that risk assessment. They answer the questions answered, the question scores, and it automatically scores into the risk assessment, which is actually printed out and sent to the magisterial district justice on the preliminary arraignments, or a common pleas judge if we're doing a bond modification, a failure to appear case, anything like that. So the validated risk assessment was one of the big things that the both studies, when we had our court scan of programs looked at, said that that's really key in making decisions. You got to understand who you're giving your services to, and so the validated risk assessment was big for us, and we had it locally validated to our population. Like I said earlier, we're currently having it revalidated. Our first go-round at the gathering the data, we did not have a case management system, so everything was in paper files. So we relied heavily on pulling thousands and thousands of paper files and trying to get out information from those paper files, where some of the information is missing. Since that time in 2007, we launched a pretrial case management system that houses all of our pretrial data. So this go-round for our risk assessment was a lot easier pulling data. We had good data, and it was complete, and it didn't take months and months and months to pull. It just took, however long it took us to get the computer applications to pull that data out. So it was a lot easier, and it's something that we're hoping is going to be done in the next month or so. Another thing that we were told that we needed to do was monitoring the jail population. So we have a population control manager, and our population control manager screens the jail population every single day for people held in jail on bonds only. It's one person. We run anywhere from 2,200 to 2,500 people in our jail. They screen that. It's going to be it's a report that's run through the jail system, and it screens out anyone who's held in jail on bond only. And then once she gets that information, she'll submit that to one of the bail investigators, and they'll look to see if we can have that bond modified. Again, if the defendant has not had a risk assessment by us, then we'll apply that risk assessment, come up with a risk score, and then look to have that bond modified to get people out of there. We found both of the studies showed that we had about 70% of the pretrial population was what was clogging up our jail. And out of that 70%, there was about half of those people were in jail on less than $130. So they're holding them in jail for $130 at $70 a day. And when all said and done, they ended up with a disorderly conduct, credit for time served 6 months later, no probation, and we had just spent, I don't know, 100 grand on a defendant that we really didn't need to. I mean, the risk wasn't there for that person to do anything. They might have ticked the magistrate off, so the magistrate put him in there. They might have made the cop mad. But we screen that every day, and that's really one of the best practices and one of the best things you can do under those evidence-based practices for keeping that jail population under control. Non-monetary alternatives to incarceration was something that we never had prior to 2007. Basically, your option was money to get out, ROR, or you didn't get out. You were held without bail. So we now have non-monetary options. Low supervision, which is phone-in. Medium supervision, which is report in person. We have high supervision, which is electronic monitoring. For those defendants. And we didn't have any pretrial supervision, so even if we would have offered judges and magistrates the option to sentence someone to pretrial supervision, we didn't have anybody to supervise it. And now we do. So they supervise about 5,000 defendants, 6 probation officers. They supervise roughly 5,000 defendants. They do things from phone call, there's phone call-ins, and people report. We have some people report every single day. Urinalysis, mental health evaluation, drug evaluation. So they monitor that, and then if need be, they go back to court. We can lower the bond conditions. We can raise the bond conditions if they're in non-compliance. DUI Alternative to Jail program was relatively new. It's October of 2010 10. So about 18 months into the program. Basically, that program was created as a result of our DUI mandatory sentencing for first-time offenders. We're clogging up the electronic monitoring program. So the alternative to jail program was created. It's we try to call it that, but everybody calls it the DUI hotel program because offenders are sentenced under the intermediate punishment statute in Pennsylvania to a local hotel where they will do their mandatory treatment for the weekend. They get their DUI sentence done. Those sentences are a minimum of 48 hours. Can't be more than a 4-day sentence because they go in on Thursday and they come out on Sunday. So they're not going to electronic monitoring. They have the option to go to the jail if they want to do that DUI sentence in the jail. But the alternative to jail program has relieved the overcrowding at the electronic monitoring program. Yes? The offenders pay for it. The question, sorry, my Oprah hasn't kicked in yet.
Oh, I was wondering who pays for the hotel at the alternate?
Yeah, the offenders pay for it. Again, when we costed it out, and it was something that we spent a good bit of time with the defense bar because they weren't crazy about that idea at all because it was self-pay. But when we costed it out, it cost them about the same or a little bit more to do their electronic monitoring sentence because of the fact that our electronic monitoring for intermediate punishment sentence is also self-pay. So, I mean, it's based on your income with a sliding scale. So it was costing people, it's $500 to do the hotel program, which includes, of course, your hotel, your meals, and all your treatment while you're at the program, as opposed to about $575 it was costing people to do electronic monitoring. So it was actually a little bit cheaper. People weren't crazy about it because that money had to be paid up front before they started the sentence, whereas on the electronic monitoring, there was a payment issue. They could make payments on that. So we're going to wait we're about 18 months into the DUI alternative to jail program. And after the first year, took a look, and we have about a 4% recidivism rate. So people that have completed the hotel, you know, again, small population number to look at over a shorter period of time, but we'll continue to monitor that for the success on that. Our court reminder notifications, we recently contracted with AnyTracks to do court reminder notifications because we weren't doing any court reminder notifications at all. Initially, our top two failure to appear hearings are formal arraignment and trial, and a monsoon. And so basically, Carnegie Mellon University came in and they did a small, little, quick, dirty pilot study for us on FTAs, the cost of FTAs, and what we could see if we instituted a court reminder system. So what they did was they took 200 people for trial, 200 people for formal arraignment. They called half the group. They didn't call the other half of the group. And basically what happened was on formal arraignment, the contacted rate of FTA was 5.8%. On the no contact for formal arraignment was 9.9%. On the trial, the contact rate was 3.4% FTA, and on the no contact was 6.7%. So in 2009, we took a look. The jail spent about $5 million for FTA alone defendants. We had $70 a day average for the jail cost. 37 days is about the length of stay on an FTA. And we had 1,995 FTAs in the jail, which roughly comes out to about $5.2 million. So even with the small decrease on their little study, that'll convert into a larger number once we expand the court notification system, which, like I said, we're currently doing. We'll hopefully next year have some good results on that. There's a study out of Multnomah County, Oregon, that talked about court reminders and the robocalls versus an actual caller. And the actual caller, actually they used, Multnomah County used retirees to call. So they come in and they would call to remind people. So it was like your grandmother calling to tell you to come to court. They actually had about a 20% better appearance rate when your grandmother called than the robo-call. We couldn't find enough senior citizens and Allegheny County who wanted to make the call. So we did go with the robocall, and hopefully, I mean, even the small CMU study really showed a nice decrease in the number of FTAs. What's next? So this is Urban Institute. We are a Justice Reinvestment at the local level grant 1 and 2 recipient, and Urban did a quick study on, well, it wasn't quick. I think it was supposed to be, but it wasn't. Ended up being quick on Allegheny County, and the decrease of about 30% in the admittance to those booked in the jail in 2007 was a direct result of our changes that we made in pretrial, and the jail noticed it right away before Urban even came in and did the study, because they did it in 2009. So there was a measurable decrease. Our next steps for pretrial. We're going to look to expand our validated risk instrument to all districts. We would really like to get that out. At this point right now, it's basically a manpower issue where we're not applying the validated risk assessment and making a bail recommendation on the magisterial district justice outline other than Pittsburgh Municipal Court. So we were going to look to do that. We're going to run a small pilot study sometime September, October with 2 magistrates, and we're going to experiment with doing interviews via video. So we'll try that. We definitely new and continued education, evidence-based training for our staff. We want to make sure that they keep getting the information that they need to make these, to do these validated risk assessments and to apply that. And we want to make sure that we're measuring our relevant processes and practices, making sure that we go ahead and if something's not working, that we're willing to go ahead and change that so that we have something that is working. The key benefits so far for all of the changes that we made is really going to be, we've provided the magisterial district justice with verified information, also the Court of Common Pleas judges. We've really created the consistency in bail recommendations. There is no more gut feeling in our bail recommendations. The recommendation is what it is. Now we do have, there's an override process on the risk assessment based on a couple of factors, but it has to be approved by a supervisor. There's mitigating factors and there's aggravating factors that are listed in the risk assessment where they would do that. We've lowered the FTA rate, thereby saving the county money on warrants and jail bed days. Our overall court FTA rate is 22%. Pretrial supervision FTA rate is 13%. And the recidivism rate overall is 27%, with the 17% for those people supervised under pretrial release. So, you know, I think we're targeting the right group of people to use our resources on. And, you know, with limited resources, you really need to get that front end risk assessment so that you are using your resources in the best possible way.
All right, with probation, our practices so far, and we're still evolving, but we talked about the proxy risk assessment that breaks our groups into low risk, medium, and high risk. And then those medium and high risk, we give the LSIR, which is a 54-item risk needs assessment. And what the LSIR does is it identifies the factors that are highly correlated with committing crimes. Antisocial peers, antisocial personality, antisocial attitudes, school and education failures, unemployment, family dysfunction, improper use of leisure time. These things are items that the research shows that if you attack these areas that are deficits in someone's life, you're more likely to prevent them from committing further crime. The research shows, you know, when I started in probation years and years ago, you know, one of the things was, well, we got to build up an offender's self-esteem. Just make them feel better about themselves and they're not going to commit crimes. Well, the evidence shows that that has nothing to do with preventing someone from committing crimes. If anything, if you build up their self-esteem, they're thinking, holy heck, I'm going to be the best criminal that I could possibly be, and I'll feel great about myself doing it. So we focus on the areas in someone's life that we can change, that are highly correlated with criminal behavior, and we put in place a supervision plan. Now, we do the LSIR on the computer. It feeds a offender supervision plan that we give the offender, and we say, these are the areas you need to work on. And so then it's our job to motivate them to fulfill those obligations. We have in place right now 2 day reporting centers. One is on the east end of Pittsburgh. The other is on the south side of Pittsburgh. And these day reporting centers are one-stop shops. In effect, we have offenders come into the day reporting center where they can take advantage of anger management classes if that's what's identified as a need. They'll be drug tested. They will receive tutoring, job preparation, job skills, how to interview. We found that employment's obviously, unemployment's it's a risk factor, but it's more complicated than that. And we find that sometimes it's really not that difficult getting someone a job, but having them maintain that employment, show up on time, show up regularly, not disrespect their boss. Those are the types of skills we try to work on to have people keep jobs. Ultimately, the goal is making them taxpayers instead of tax consumers. We're in the process of expanding our case management system to record data for outcomes. Got to know whether we're making progress or not, if what we're doing is having a positive effect, or whether we need to change things. We also, since we apply and get, we're very fortunate, we receive a lot of grants from Bureau of Justice Assistance and Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. If you ask for a grant nowadays, you better be able to record what your grant is doing and show the outcomes. So a lot of responsibility, a lot of emphasis on recording the data accurately and reporting it and measuring. We have 7 specialty courts. Drug court, DUI court, mental health court, sex offender court, veterans court, what am I forgetting? Domestic violence court, and prostitution court. Just want to focus on right now drug court. Drug court has shown the research across the country, drug courts are very effective. But why are they very effective? Well, we use drug court. They're intermediate punishment sentences. In order to be eligible for drug court, they have to be, in Pennsylvania, they're called level 3 and level 4 offenders. So that means that they have to be looking at county or state jail time. They have to be eligible, and there's a list of charges that would make them ineligible. And drug court, they have to have, they have to go through an assessment to determine the level of treatment necessary, and then they're reviewed and they're closely monitored. We put them on an ankle bracelet. We have regular reviews in front of the judge. We have these progress hearings. We sanction immediately when they violate, and also we reward them. I mean, if you ask anyone who goes through drug court, it's a lot harder than just doing the time in jail, but it's much more rewarding and more successful. So drug court, close to 70% of the offenders that go through our drug court successfully completed. So drug court is the evidence is showing that it's an effective specialty court program. Offender reentry programs. We realized that we were having, a number of years ago, we were having trouble keeping track of parolees when they were getting released from our county jail. They would be in the wind by the time we find out, we were notified that they were paroled. So we put in place, we applied for Second Chance Act grant funding to put in place a reentry team that begins working with offenders while they're in the jail. It allowed us to put a probation officer, station a probation officer in the jail. And Second Chance Act funds focus on preparing someone for reentry with programming in the jail, and then following up in the community with resources, again, using risk needs assessments, identifying what they need to work on, setting up a supervision plan while they're in jail, having quick contact with the probation officer and the handoff to a community-based probation officer to monitor their progress. close attention while they're in the community. We received grant funding for Second Chance 1 in 2009, received the second year of funding. The grant is now being evaluated. We're part of a national study, empirical study through the Bureau of Justice Assistance. It shows so much promise, we applied for a Second Chance Act, a Second Chance Act. We call it SCA 2. And whereas Second Chance Act 1 is for people sentenced to jail who volunteer to participate, we feel it's so important to prepare someone for reentry that everyone who's not in Second Chance 1, whether they volunteer or not, when they come out of jail, they're going to be assigned to a group of probation officers who are going to start working with them in the jail and follow up and closely monitor them once they get out. So we've made huge steps in terms of how we work with offenders and prepare them for return to the community. I mean, the bottom line is, unless someone dies in jail or prison, they're getting out at some point. So we need to do the best we can to stop them from reoffending and causing more victims. Electronic monitoring. We use electronic monitoring extensively in Allegheny County. Electronic monitoring is used. One of the reasons we use electronic monitoring is we lead the league in DUI arrests in Pennsylvania, even more so than Philadelphia. DUI will cause, well, as Janice mentioned earlier, someone's arrested for DUI. The law requires for certain levels of DUI offending mandatory jail time. EM can substitute for that jail time. But it became so popular and we had so many people on intermediate punishment with electronic monitoring, not only DUI offenders, but other electronic monitoring cases, that as recently as the beginning of 2011, we had over 1,000 people on a wait list. So we had to make changes, and one of the things we did is we set up the DUI hotel. We now, the court and probation put in steps in place to address people, their electronic monitoring, get them on quickly, monitor them, and to reduce that caseload, and we eliminated the wait list. We still have between 800 and 1,000 on the ankle bracelet. It's very effective. Between 2009 and 2011, we were able to monitor the recidivism, and 1.6% of offenders who were put on the ankle bracelet recidivated. So very small percentage. 1.6% were rearrested who were wearing the ankle bracelet. So we know that people, while they're wearing that ankle bracelet, are not going to commit another crime. So it's a very effective program. It also is you know, it saves money instead of incarcerating. We estimated that between 2009 and 2011 that we saved, if offenders who were on EM had been in jail, we saved 114,000 jail days, which translates to approximately $7 million. So you can see it's a cost saving. Not only is it cost saving, but it's also a safe alternative. So you can let someone out of jail on the bracelet, and with 1.6%, that's outstanding. Oh, next steps. Plan for probation. Next steps. We're going to expand our. Ideally, we'd like to expand our day reporting center. Jerry looks surprised. Oh, we didn't tell you that? Jerry's our financial guru. We'd like to expand our day reporting center network to 4 regional day reporting centers, 4 one-stop shops. We'd like to put in place a formalized SWIFT sanction and reward incentive program. Research shows that you know, it's not necessarily the length of incarceration or a length of a consequence, but the swiftness and the certainty that is strongly correlated with effective probation supervision so that we could actually prevent further crimes by, if someone is in violation of probation or parole, putting in place swift, certain consequences and rewards programs. We found it's encouraging that the state legislature and passed the law, and the governor recently signed it, Senate Bill 100, that encourages courts to set up a swift sanctioning process, swift sanctioning program, and incentives. Also, we have to make sure we have set up baseline measurables so that we know, what's the recidivism rate, what's the baseline for what we're measuring to determine whether we're making progress, whether it's effective or not. And if it's not effective, if the evidence shows a program or an effort's not working, then we have to change it. We need to expand our evidence-based training for officers. It's not a one-and-done training where someone just comes in and trains someone on how to do motivational interviewing to get offenders to buy into how they need to change their lives. It's an ongoing process. Same thing with being skilled in doing risk assessments. We just received a grant through George Mason University and the Bureau of Justice Assistance to put in place an e-learning pilot study that's going to begin next month. And this will allow us to train our staff up to, well, right now it will start with 50 probation officers, plus all the management team's going to go through it. And online, learn about evidence-based practices through 5 learning modules that are entry, up to advanced skills, and this will allow us, so instead of sending someone to training or bringing in a trainer and paying those expenses, we can do it online, and we can educate our staff and bring up their skills with the e-learning system. Also, we need to establish quality control and compliance. You can have the best programs in the world, but if they're not being performed with fidelity, then it's a waste of time. You need to do it right. You need to follow the way the programs that are shown to be effective. You need to carry them out the way they are designed, and we need to make sure we're doing that. So these are all next steps for us.
So measuring what matters, I guess when you're starting to figure out if you're going to do these evidence-based practices, you got to figure out what you want to measure so that you can get those results. In pretrial, of course, we're going to measure that appearance rate. And we measure it 2 ways. We look at appearance rate overall for our court appearance. And since we don't see everybody, we look at appearance rate for those people that we're actually supervising. Make sure that we're continuing to use the probation officers and our resources for the court reminder system, that it's working. I mean, we don't want to leave people alone and get the same results if we're spending money to remind them and supervise them. So we want to make sure we do that. The safety rate would be the percentage of defendants, supervised defendants who are not charged with a new offense prior to end of the current case. So we'll measure that. Concurrence rate is your rate of defendants whose supervised level or detention status corresponds with their risk. So if someone comes out as a medium risk defendant, but we see that they're getting high risk conditions, we want to also monitor that. We monitor that for a couple reasons. One, we look at what the judge or the magistrate is looking at, and most of the time it's charge on that. The success rate in the pretrial detainee length of stay is something that we've really been trying to look at. So the performance measures for probation, they're going to look at new arrests, convicted violations, technical violations, revocations, employed on the front end, employed on the back end, if they got a job. So there's lots of different things you can measure. There's some things that you want to collect that's really going to be what they call mission critical data. Where you want to get it, you may not measure it, but it's something that down the road you may look to do, especially if you expand your practices or change what you're doing. So these are some collaborative grants that we have. Like I said, collaboration is a huge thing when you're instituting evidence-based practices. We have the Second Chance 1 and 2. Ron talked a little bit about those, justice reinvestment at the local level. First and second Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, there was too many grants up there from them to list. We have actually partnered also with our Department of Human Services, and so we get, again, not technically a grant, but they pay for some of the services. They're looking to expand to go into the DRC to share some of the costs on those DRCs. So as we talk to those people, Department of Human Services, the Health Department, then it's apparent that we would be able to save some money and collaboratively do those. Inmate Welfare Fund and private foundations. We have we work with private foundations in our reentry program, Child Guidance Foundation, Robert Wood Johnson. So we've really sort of thought outside of the box when you're talking about looking at those grants and attempting to continue to do what you want to do, but get the money for it, which is usually important. This last one's just the resource page. So, I mean, we have about 10 minutes left if anybody has any questions. Or if you want to go play in the rain, you're more than welcome to play in the rain because it sounds like it's doing it. Yes?
I was wondering, before and after you implemented these changes, which look to be very promising and impressive, did you have to change your capacity or increase your capacity for data gathering and analysis, for design and implementation of evaluations, for conducting research, and for quality control? Did you have to make any major changes in that, or were you able to do that with the staff that you had?
Well, on the probation side, that's a huge challenge. The oversight and the quality control is still on the wish list as far as the probation side. One of the key factors to implement this is to have the capacity to gather your evidence and measure it and slice it and dice it whatever way you want. So within the past 5 years, the strain on our IT department was tremendous. And we're still struggling with that. Our IT director's in the back. He might not think so, but I think we are thinking that. When you come right down to it, any grant in any part of the court, anything you're trying to do, you got to relate to performance. It wasn't like that 10 years ago. Problem is in our IT department, their staff hasn't changed in 10 years. You know, the staff he has, he's never increased that staff. The demand on that, not only from probation and pretrial, but from the court processing, all these other components, family division, is tremendous. And we struggle with that a little bit. Internally, we've developed a system for case management that we home grew. These guys did it. So we were lucky in that regard that we had the skills and talent with our IT people to develop the program to pull the kind of data we need. It's a tremendous amount of work for those guys, and it's still an issue with us. Yeah, and we're doing that. Yeah.
Excuse me, when you said the IT staff hasn't changed, you meant hasn't increased in personnel?
Right.
Not that they've been the same for the last 10 years.
No.
You're welcome, Sean.
I mean, I'm talking about the capabilities. I carry his flag for him. I wouldn't want that job. There's a tremendous amount of pressure to collect this data and to be able to give it back. And our court administrator doesn't have real good bedside manner when it comes to demanding data for grants, and that's just the kind of things we have to deal with. Yes, ma'am.
I got it. Yeah, we actually have a prevention department with a prevention coordinator and staff there. We get money back from the state every year to use for prevention that comes from offender fees collected, and we use that money. Adult prevention doesn't really work, right? They don't come unless they're ordered to come, like by the court or something. Kids, you've got that captive audience. So we go to all schools in our county, and we offer them all free of charge prevention programs. So yeah, we spend a good bit of time, and most of the staff loves doing that. I mean, they like going out to the schools. We sponsor it was basically Students Against Destructive Decision. Mothers Against Drunk Driving used to have it. They sort of discontinued it. We picked it up about 7 years ago. So we've been doing that. We were about 400 high school students. We bring them in for a day of, education on drug and alcohol issues surrounding the court system, and them understanding if you get in trouble. Kids don't even understand that if you get convicted of something, that's not going away. It's staying on your record forever. So if you're 17, yep. Right. They think if you wait 5 years, it doesn't matter what it is, it's, magically disappears. So just sort of getting that out. But yeah, we do spend time and a good bit of money on prevention. Sure.
Any other questions?
Those are really some remarkable results that you guys have achieved. I'm wondering, looking back, it might be easier to answer that question. What kind of examples of collateral damage did you encounter as you implemented? What kind of people did you step on inadvertently in a planned fashion? What kind of pitfalls would you expect to see if you were doing this all over again? It's kind of what have we learned from this, right? Getting this program to where it is today. Thank you.
That's sort of a tough question. From outside stakeholders, it's more of an education. You're not stepping on people. What you're trying to do is convince people that what you want to do fits. Where you notice it when you embark on something with such a huge cultural change is the internal staff. When I come back to probation and took over, Ron will tell you, we had a rash of retirements of people that were retirement age that didn't want any parts of doing any kind of casework on this kind of level. They sort of were comfortable and like the old-fashioned, they sit there behind their desk and drink their coffee and, make sure people were in jail when they get arrested, and didn't have the energy to develop the skills to be able to motivate defendants and do that. So internally, it caused a lot. It cost a lot of, and when we did it with pretrial back in 2007, we had the exact same thing. We had internally, you had the challenges of the older staff, and they just simply left because we went from a completely non-automated system to a completely automated system. There were guys doing bail investigations that couldn't type. And they were basically just, they either learned or they had to go, and they went. But collaterally...
Externally, I think, and we still suffer some of it, the police. We get a good bit of backlash from the police departments on, again, the being soft on crime, and that non-monetary, they don't understand, at least on the pretrial side, that making someone pay $500 to get out of jail doesn't make it any safer for that person to be released than if you release them and they have to go to report to the pretrial office. Bail bondsmen, we had a little bit of backlash early on, maybe in the first 6 months, and then they kind of backed off. We cut their business in by 75% when we went away from monetary bonds. Almost every bond, if you didn't get released ROR, you paid money to get out. We had few and far between unsecured bail, but so we had a bit of a backlash from them, but they sort of went by the wayside when they realized that this wasn't going away, and the court was relatively unified on, we're doing this, and everyone was pretty much touting the same philosophy. So that was good.
I'll just add that these changes don't happen overnight. It takes time. That's why I use the term, evolution. It's sort of the analogy of trying to turn a aircraft carrier around is going full steam ahead. It's going to take time. It's not going to be immediate, but you have to keep moving forward, keep training, keep looking at the evidence, and you'll get the results.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much for coming.
Have a good rest.